Ya Wahed Matsafash, and welcome to Shift+F1, a podcast about speedy race cars, everyone. That is Arabic for one hand doesn't clap.
Okay, whoa. Okay, wow. Hey, have you seen this?
Whoa, wow. Flying in the face of Arabic tradition. An idiomatic Arabic expression, meaning some things require teamwork.
That's
Some
true.
things like Formula One, like this podcast, like welding a drain cover. I'm Drew Scanlon. Joining me, Danny O'Dwyer. How are you, Danny?
I'm grand. Of all the things, I believe in teamwork. It does make the dream work. But of all the things, clapping is generally something I do myself. Unless you consider both my hands and arms.
That's the team.
The team. Is that the team?
Yeah.
The team is... I've never thought of my body as a team. You know?
Are you the coach then?
Am I the manager? I must be. Yeah, okay. I'm back in. Although I would pay a lot of money to see like a crowd of people at a soccer game all clapping, or an F1 race, which would be more appropriate for this podcast, all clapping, but none of them clapping with their own hands, always
Only the
clapping
other
with
people.
somebody else. Yeah.
Yeah.
That'd be
Yeah.
absolutely cosmic horror.
You ever read about those experiments where they sever the link between left and right brain, and then people effectively have two identities, and their hands are one is per each identity? It's freaky, man. It is messed up.
What? That's is this a horror? Is this Idle Hands, or is this a horror movie you watched?
Sort of.
That's so freaky that I'm like, is that real?
I will find you some links.
Is that real? Can you do that? Is that how
I'll
brain
find you
has
some
worked?
Let's do it. Let's do it, Rob.
That's Rob Zachney. How are you, Rob?
Not doing as well as I was a minute ago. Now that I live in a world where it's possible, they can just like split your brain and
Yeah.
like, you know, you're two
Oh yeah,
people now.
it's even freakier. They will ask the person a question, they'll respond verbally, but write something different.
Oh my God, I hate this.
Yes.
I hate this. Is this where demons come from, Drew?
If you are new to this podcast, welcome. It's not normally this freaky. If you are new to Formula One itself, though, we've got an episode just for you. We just released it 2 weeks ago. Our preseason primer episode assumes no prior F1 knowledge and explains how the sport works and who everybody is. So if you'd like to go back and listen to that, it's episode, oh no, I haven't updated this document. I believe it's 257. Also, the show would not be possible without our audience over at patreon.com/shiftf1, where every month we release an ad-free version of the podcast. Actually, that's weekly.
It is.
Along with bonus podcasts and videos, those are monthly, that are exclusively for our patrons, that cover racing documentaries and films, F1 video games, experiments with other racing series, and a lot of weird things. So if you'd like to support the show and get access to all that fun stuff, head over to patreon.com/shiftf1 or click the link in the show notes. What do we have going on this month, Danny?
This past month, we just reviewed the latest blockbuster sensation, Ferrari, starring Adam Driver, which I've only just realized is an astonishingly great name for somebody
Star
who's
in a car movie.
starring in a car movie. So we did that. Go check that out if you're interested. That is a movie that goes places. Shocking in many ways. Some great performances too.
Shocking accents.
Shocking, exactly, and not just the accents. We are also doing this coming month. We are taking on Drive to Survive. We are splitting it up into 2 podcasts. So this coming month in March, we will have the first half of that. So episodes 1 through 5 of Netflix's annual, now in its 6th year, F1 docu series.
I actually screamed yes at my television.
When you were watching it?
Yes, at a moment in episode 4.
Okay.
Wait, no, hang on.
Is that one of the
I know I
Renault
watched episode
ones?
4, yeah.
Or
That's not the Vowels and Steiner one?
Yes.
Okay.
That's the next one up for me, and I'm pretty hype.
Yes, there's a scene that I was legitimately thinking, oh, at least Rob's happy when it came up. I was like, great. Just out of interest, have you watched a few episodes of it, Drew? I've almost finished it.
Yeah, I'm through 4.
Right. Without spoiling it, I think it's quite good this year. I think.
Yes, that was my reaction as well.
Yes.
Yeah, the phrase in my head is return to form.
Yes. Yeah. Okay. Well, enjoy more of that, patrons, over on the Patreon feed. And also massive shout out and thanks to our incredible title sponsors: Get Rich or Die Ryan, Agave ATX, Cyphers Training, Turf SCS, at Team Blackjack, Michael Maves, Gordy's Army, at Talking Autos, Olivia Evans, App Analytics Telemetry Deck TD F1 Team, FTC, Drew Stewart, Bailey Foot, Abdullah Al-Thani, MasterCard Venmo JC Racing Stick F1 Team Punch. There's a
theme here.
There's a theme. Abraham Getchell, The Space Above Us podcast, Yabs, Snigs, Alex Goucher, Max Faltar, Circuit Demon, Troy Stammer, William Rumpf, Irvine Clinical Research, back in the saddle. We missed you. Lachlan the Madden Man, and of course, Jason Kelly. Thank you all so much. Our car. It's mostly, it's covered in your logos, which is very helpful because this year we went for a very carbon fiber sort of look to the car. It's mostly
the logos
black.
are black, but they're there.
Yes, unfortunately. Yes, we the negative space of the logos is just also carbon fiber. We just put it on there.
Well, everyone, it's been a week of Formula One before the Formula One has even happened because testing has concluded. So we've got a packed show. We're going to talk testing, we're going to talk news, and we're going to talk pre-Bahrain because it's coming up on Saturday.
I know.
Really cramming it in here. It's like nothing happened and then someone turned on the F1 faucet and we're getting blasted. We're drinking from the fire hose.
We are. I'm excited. And Drive to Survive. It's F1 mania at the moment.
Yeah. So did anyone watch testing?
Yeah, I watched a decent amount of it. I was in. There are so many different ways to consume testing nowadays. Like I feel like in the past, 10 years ago, especially, you'd read an article, you know what I mean, like that would tell you kind of what you needed to know before they were doing anything on that. Remember, we used to talk early seasons of this podcast about how underutilized that F1 YouTube channel was, and it's just night and day at the moment. To say nothing of F1 TV, of course. But yeah, I watched it in various different ways. On the F1 TV, I watched it live. I also watched, they had highlights on YouTube, and then they had extended highlights, which were like maybe 25-30 minutes long over on F1 TV. And then they had the F1 TV crew doing roundups both there and a shortened version of it on the YouTube channel as well. So there was kind of no way to avoid it. And then they had all their tech. They Jolyon Palmer out there doing his roundups and stuff. The tech guy doing all his bits and bobs. So yeah, it was interesting. And I think who?
Sorry, never mind.
Danica Patrick. Oh wait, wrong podcast.
Sam Collins, right? Is their tech specialist. I haven't watched a ton of the F1 TV, folks, but like we were doing some Motorsport Manager stuff on the Remap Twitch, and people were like, Sam Collins is awesome. Like there are a lot of F1 TV is making inroads with people who watch F1. I think some of it's just people getting a little fatigued of Crofty and Brundle. But I also think like F1 TV has got that sort of we are F1, and so all we have, our only coverage priority is F1. So we can do these little shows with like, like you're not going to get on ESPN some sort of like Sky broadcast of a Sam Collins equivalent or a Jolyon Palmer analysis. Yeah. And they're very good.
They're very good. Yeah.
Here's half hour with a telestrator that is not going to sell ads.
And Sam Collins is so good at it. He's so knowledgeable. He's a very good communicator. But also, I feel like at this time of year, when it's new livery time, his analysis is second to none. It's so useful. Because, like, on the face of it, show me that RB20 and show me the Red Bull's car last year, the RB19. And will I be able to tell you that all the cars this year are copying last year's and that the RB20 is, basically has gone down the Mercedes route last year that was a road to nowhere? I wouldn't have been able to tell you that. Like, he was showing photographs of like the crazy way in which the aerodynamics are being used on the RB20 that are basically allowing it to get that extra bit of cooling into the engine that Mercedes weren't able to do, and also the way it's like directing more air down below with the for the ground effect stuff as well. And I'm sure we'll get into a Mercedes' front wing as well in a similar way. But yeah, it's been great. And it's interesting. There's a lot to take from testing that is very much, same as last year, but there is also critically some interesting stuff going on with the teams that, we never know. It's always, we don't know what their engine mode is. We don't know what the fuel situation is either. There's always different things going on, but you generally get some sort of an idea from testing as to where the momentum is lying anyway.
Yeah, and for people not, on the ground there talking to F1 drivers and team members, you do kind of have to, assemble your opinion from multiple sources and read between the lines a lot. Like you said, Danny, teams will often sandbag, meaning that they hide their true pace to keep, everybody else guessing. I think a good indicator is the attitudes of the drivers. So I've pulled here a quote from one driver on each team that I think is, at least sort of in line with kind of the feeling that I've been reading or hearing about each team. So I figure we can kind of go down these and then if we want, kind of dive into other things that we've noted about the teams or the cars. Starting right off the bat, we were already talking about Red Bull. Max Verstappen says everything went well. The balance was very nice. We completed the whole program without any problems. He's talking about like the testing strategy that they approached the track with. The car is better than last year's car. You guys alluded to it, but I was really surprised that Red Bull even changed their car at all, because it cleaned up last year. But you're right, Danny, they made a, not just an incremental change to it. It does seem like they're trying to perfect what Mercedes failed to.
I'm interested in what Rob thinks about do you remember the Adrian Newey meme of him looking at the Mercedes car last year
I can fix her. Yeah.
He fixed her.
I mean, by all accounts, and I think this is why Mercedes had trouble walking away from it, there were a lot of inspired insights about the new aero regulations that suggested that the reduced side pod and having the car sort of cascade or plop down toward the ground level was going to be a winning strategy. And Mercedes just couldn't execute it and they couldn't perfect it. And I think everyone was ready to junk it. Crucially, I think Lewis Hamilton was ready to junk it at the end of 2022. But to Drew's point, what I find so fascinating, and maybe at some point we'll get insight into this, when it's all done and dusted. What's the internal logic like or discussion like in a place like Red Bull when your car dominated? You came out of a season with a car that was categorically better than any other machine on the grid. And then in the off season, you decide to radically reconsider that design. And on top of that, embrace a design that kind of spectacularly failed 2 years in a row. Right. Might have caused a marquee driver to quit. And, seemed like one of the biggest missteps in F1. And so I do kind of wonder, is there just an assumption at Red Bull that by the end of a year, everyone kind of knows what your car is going to do. Everyone's going to be able to go to school. There's so much data. There's so much photography. You're not going to be able to, your advantage is going to disappear unless you do something different. And so you go casting about for other ideas. But I can't imagine anything more, man, I just keep trying to find what's a different word than swagger, but there might not be getting around it. Like Adrian Newey, and Red Bull just sort of do that meme. If they're yeah, that was a neat idea. That was nifty what you Mercedes guys were up to. You just couldn't deliver it, but we can. But we can. And they pull that off.
It's really something. There was a lot of scuttlebutt last year about how, halfway through last year they were already working on this car, right? They had it sewn up. Rob makes a good point that sure, if everyone next year is going to copy your car, maybe that makes you move in a direction that maybe it motivates you a little bit more. But the thing that I can't get over is, I guess you have to tackle this stuff year by year, but it is wild that they also did this knowing that they only have this car for 1 year, that there are new regulations coming in next year. and this is just them being like, hey, you know what?
Well,
Screw it.
2025 rules aren't that different.
Oh,
You're
sorry,
right. So it's
26.
really
You're right.
26,
Sorry.
yeah.
So it is 2.
So-
it is 2 years. You're right.
But
I
there's no indication, like, what are the odds that they don't do something screwy and different again in 2020? Like, it's that ability to, and I guess, that's a good point you make. If they are effectively able to start rolling off their current competitive year car, development-wise, by mid-season, I can't imagine, like, that is tough to beat. If effectively, like, half of their budget for next year's car development
right.
is already being spent the calendar, the racing year before, like, oh my god, the ground you have to regain on these guys as one of their competitors is so vast.
I feel like Haas does the same thing every year, but it doesn't work out for them. You know what I mean? I feel like they're already halfway through the season going like, oh, we're working on next year's. But
Yeah, so a few things here. One is I one of the reasons this shocked me so much is that Red Bull has always been about like incremental change, and then this is a real drastic one. I got to believe that when Adrian Newey came to Christian Horner and said, "I think I'm going to do the Mercedes thing," who other than Adrian Newey would you trust with that? I think you have to say like, well, I guess you would know. You got to go for it. Yeah, the thing that worries me though is Red Bull. I think some of their reasoning is that I saw one quote that said that they feel like last year's car they had squeezed every ounce of performance out of it. Like they basically plateaued. So if that's the case, if that's true, even if every other team made Red Bull's exact car again, they wouldn't be able to catch this one. If it's better,
if that's true, and what's worth mentioning as well is that like across the field, the cars were faster. Like everyone's doing better.
Yeah,
it where you shake out in the field of 10 cars is kind of the issue here.
Well, we should just talk about real quick because I was just thinking about like why did the Mercedes design fail, and it has to do with the porpoising. Like as I go back and think about this, remember that there was that whole controversy of Toto Wolff and Mercedes being like, what we need to do is mandate that everyone be forced to raise their ride height to deal with the porpoising effect because the drivers are unsafe. Yeah. And we get that immoral moment in Drive to Survive where Toto Wolff's in the meeting where he's like, I will come for you if anything happens to the drivers. And everyone's like, dude, come on. Anyway, but the point is, like, Mercedes' aero concept for that car, by all accounts, the theory was never disproven that it wasn't going to be a good car. They just never managed. The design doesn't work unless it can hug the ground. This is the thing with the ground effect cars. They have to be like really, really close to the tarmac.
And cockpit positioning was the other thing as well. Hamilton hated it, especially apparently that their seating was like way much more forward than he wanted. And it seems like they've solved some of that with the air duct stuff they've done. Then like hidden air ducts that are on the side pods.
But I'm saying the Red Bull was always able to run lower, and this was like why Mercedes was protesting. So they were starting a place where like we basically do know how to like get closer to the ground, which means the thing that caused the zero side pod concept to fail already kind of doesn't hold for us. That we're not going to have the stalling problem that our competitors did. That opens up a world of possibilities. But yeah, I think you're right, Drew. Like I think it's a thing that Adrian Newey can do because there's more credibility in his aero department than anywhere else on the grid. And also, I think because of that, everyone else has got to be conservative. Nobody wants to look like Mercedes looked bad trying a concept that failed, right? Yeah. Like it became a real point of like, it kind of shattered the mystique around that team. And so I think a lot of other teams are going to tend to be a little bit conservative about some of these like strategic shifts with their development. And Red Bull does have the luxury of kind of playing with house money at this point.
Yeah.
So yeah.
Well, speaking of Mercedes, they and Ferrari were both, fairly positive sentiments were coming out of there. Although I think we have to, with all of these, understand that they're relative, right? And so this quote from Russell says, "It was definitely pleasurable to drive yesterday. I had a good feeling within the car. We can really lean on it better than we've been able to in the past. We have a huge, huge mountain to climb to catch up with what Red Bull was doing last year and how far ahead of everyone else they were. We need to wait and see, but we've definitely got a much better platform to build upon. This is going to be a theme here. And it's not the diva that it was in the last 2 years.
Right. Yes. The platform that they all talk about is basically just having like a solid foundation. And then as long as that's the case, we can iterate on it all year, as opposed to, let's say, Haas last year, who just the concept of the car was not working and they eventually have to just go back to an earlier iteration because they can't even incrementally work on it. Yeah, it sounds like Mercedes have also solved the sort of like rear wing problems they were having. The back of that car seemed to be very unsettled. Same with Ferrari as well. And obviously both of them were dealing with porpoising this time last year, right? So they came out of testing last year, both of them not particularly jazzed about the cars they were driving. But it sounds like, it sounds across the board again, it seems like the cars are able to, like you saw with the amount of curbs everyone was taking, like they're just more stable. They're not losing grip off of that type of what would you call it, like caustics or whatever. And also I think in general you tend to get a lot of red flags, apart from the drain cover that happened in Bahrain, which they are now talking about concreting over because it happened twice on the weekend. Perhaps because people were on the curb so much. Aside from that, everyone got around with, the reliability of the cars was fantastic. So that's, again, you're probably going to see that this far into an era. But both teams happy, which is good, because then that means that hopefully they have a bit more juice to throw towards developing the car and closing that gap with Red Bull. I'm trying to be optimistic.
Well, hang on though. I'd have to get in the Wayback Machine to see how. I don't know that I remember people coming out of testing last year and walking straight out on the ledge. I do remember by the end of the race weekend, right, it was time to like rend the garments. And so I do wonder like right now
there's still time for everyone to have a bad time.
Yeah, like it was like this is where Mercedes had its very like, well, the season's over, goodbye. And that was, kind of rage quitting the season and a half. With just 22 races left to go or something like that,
and going home.
That's right.
So I am curious about, and this is the big question about testing to an extent, is like right now there's always this pressure to make clear that everyone's on the same page, we're not angry at each other, we're working together, it's going to be fine. I think there's going to be extra pressure to do that at Mercedes right now, just given the context of the band is breaking up, and it's clear that technical disputes have been a part of probably why that has happened. And so I do think you're going to see a little more, both at Mercedes and at Ferrari, attempts to be like, we're all on the same page here. We're all excited to develop this car. And I think teams will try to be better about that. But I also think if people just get rinsed again by the Red Bull, and crucially, if they end up not feeling great about how the cars are handling, I would not be surprised if the tune we are singing next week is very different.
Well, there are some outlying tunes in the grid here that we'll get to. But yeah, just this one from Leclerc on Ferrari, quote from race fans. He said the car was easier to drive in the wind and a lot more consistent, which was a big sort of bugbear for them last year. Quote, but that doesn't necessarily mean, especially in qualifying, that we'll win a lot thanks to that. And that doesn't mean anything compared to Red Bull. Drivability and competitiveness are two very different things. So we still have to work a lot, and then we'll see how competitive we are next Friday.
Yeah, that's the other thing, is that we will get a much better idea of what single lap speed looks like and what race pace looks like. And obviously Ferrari last year, they had the best qualifying car. And when it came to the race though, it was only a matter of time before Checo managed to get from 8th position up until fighting for second. But yeah, good to see at least that wiggliness that they had last year is gone. Because I think as a driver, that seems to be one of the things they hate the most. When lap after lap, it's a different car. And that seems to definitely be the case with their car and a couple of others.
I would characterize Ferrari as sort of a quiet confidence. Mercedes is like a hopeful, like
optimism.
Sort of optimism. Yeah. McLaren, I'm not sure. So this is Norris. He says, do I think we've taken a step forward? Absolutely. Do I think we've made a lot of things better? Yes. but I still think it's a very long way behind Red Bull and a long way behind Ferrari. So plenty of work for us to still try and achieve, but also plenty of things that we've learned over the last few days for us to implement before next week.
Yeah, I can't tell with them. It does seem like they have an edge over the Mercedes. But the body language, again, like you said, like that, you can learn a lot from the body language. And really, Lando's the only driver on that team you can really judge as well. I think Piastri didn't have necessarily a particularly strong testing. But yeah, I don't know. It's all going to come down to race pace and how good that McLaren's able to deal with like degradation. I guess Bahrain's an interesting one because there's no high speed corners in it, really. Some straights and some low speed corners, medium speed, but so I don't know if it'll be.
There's kind of a fast sweeper, like at the end of sector 2, start sector 3, but it's not. It's so straight that's barely
the one up the hill.
Corner. Yeah.
Or, yeah.
There's a kink to it, but there's not. It's before. It's not. There's not enough corner happening there, I think, for you to really judge.
And they get a bit more grip because it's uphill as well, which I think helps them out a bit. Or maybe that's worse for Deg actually. But McLaren are in there at least. Like we could be having a conversation where McLaren are backfighting with some of the other teams, but it does seem like they are starting where they ended last year. Is that fair to say?
Which is great because last year they started horribly. And I think it's funny that Drew, you and I are both at a similar point in Drive to Survive. I think I would have found Lando's comments more alarming if I hadn't started to dial in just like, this is just how Lando is. And I think he is somebody where if you are looking, I think a lot of other drivers like will do they will give the politician answer and then they will actually sound like they believe it. And Lando just doesn't. He will give you the most like flat, like being just realistic. Like, is it better? Yes. Is it good? No, but maybe. And right. I think from any other driver, you'd be like, holy shit, he just turned the tea table over.
Yeah.
And I think that's just Lando.
If Alonso did that, you'd be, ooh.
Yeah. Yeah. Like, right. Like Alonso says something like that. Like, so that's a little rattlesnake.
Yeah. I wonder if that is chalking up, or if he would chalk that up to Norris's relationship with Zach Brown, because they are so chummy that maybe he feels like he can be a little more, candid.
He's also just like of a generation as well, right? Like he is that guy. I mean, he used to be a lot more sort of, I don't know, outwardly expressive or something, but ever since he's had this sort of like serious turn in the past 2 years, this has been the way he speaks, which is, it's authentic.
It's weird. He's English, but the thing is, I feel like he's also very. I'm from Indiana, just original Chicago area, but I'm from Indiana, and crucially, like so is like David Letterman, right? And if you think about David Letterman, kind of the mean talk show host of his day, like still very popular one, but like kind of caustic, sardonic, real like quick to be ironic and detached from things. And I kind of feel that's Lando in a lot of ways. Like I sort of like I start to get like pick up that is kind of just how he approaches things, which might help him get along with Zach Brown. So I think that's a similar sort of bolt of cloth. But yeah, it's one of those things where I think it's going to be, can McLaren maintain a positive trajectory? Last season they could. They showed they can meaningfully improve a car across the season. If they can continue doing that, great. But if not, there were concerning signs at this testing.
Yeah, I think Aston Martin's another one of those, just like not a lot of hard talking here, just sort of like, well, it was tough to find a quote, frankly, from a driver, but I did get this one from Alonso from motorsport.com. He was asked, I think, if they have a race-winning car. He says, I think it's difficult to tell now. I would say, I think after seeing Max and the Red Bull car this year, there are less chances for everybody to win a race this year, but this is how it is.
Yeah, those years.
He also said something like 19 drivers know that they're not winning a championship this year.
Yeah, and those years they're ticking away on him. You know what I mean?
Well, and that's why like I it's almost binary for him probably. Like,
right?
Well, I don't care how the car is. I'm not winning a championship, and I'm frustrated by that.
Yeah, we're all frustrated too. Yeah, it's a bummer. It seems we'll have to see. Again, I don't think we knew that car was where it was after testing last year. I think it was a shock after the first 4 or 5 races. They just got to make sure that Lance isn't going on any cycling trips, and for the next couple of days, I guess he's almost there without breaking both of his wrists.
Next one up here is Alpine, and this I feel like might be the most drastic shift that we're looking at. It's also the one that's sort of the least guarded. So to hear the now team principal Bruno Famine say it, this from Autosport, quote, "There's a lot to learn for sure. The car is new from front to back. The chassis is different. The suspension is different. The aero is different. We wanted to try to improve the weak point of the previous car. Let's wait for next week to see if we're on target." Gasly does not seem super hopeful that it's going to be on target. He says, quote, also from Autosport, "It's not going to be an easy first race. We're not going to start from where we would have liked." All the scuttlebutt also around this is that the car is overweight, and by changing everything, they have a tall task in front of them.
Overweight car's not going to fit in those tight shirts, man. They, it's the French team. They gotta keep it lean. I don't know what to think about. Alpine were the most absent team last season. They just seem to never turn up, and I kind of worry for both those drivers. Like, this is kind of the years that you need to be, making a bit more of a name for yourself. Like, they're not spring chickens anymore. And I do wonder that if we get in these new regs and maybe some new blood, like, these are the drivers that might slip by. I'm not sure. What do you think, Rob?
I feel, did we actually, sometimes I lose track of what conversations we've had on the air versus things we've just like said offline. I feel like we've had conversations about like Alpine look lost. That program looks lost. Everything about like Laurent Rossi like laid waste to that program. The firing of Safnauer, maybe was the right move, but also it kind of like smacked of desperation. But like, it all stems off the back of this was a team that couldn't get basic legal paperwork done on time, which is why the Piastri is like their contracts department screws that. Like, that is not a well-run operation, and I do kind of wonder. I do kind of wonder what the corporate patience level is for this team continuing to struggle, because it does not feel. It does. You're right, Danny. When you say they're the team that feels like it doesn't show up, even when they're having like okay races and are driving in the points. It also feels like, at best, they're like a cork in the bottle, very rarely like relevant to other teams' races, very rarely like making other people like sweat. And then this wasn't a good testing. Car didn't look good. Drivers came out of it. The quote you read, Drew, I think most other teams that have points of concern, somebody can muster up something that sounds a little more upbeat about it. And it already feels like they're in damage control. It just doesn't. It doesn't feel good where Alpine is at.
Yeah, Williams was another one that was tough to find driver quotes from, but I got one from here from SB Nation from Alex Albon. Quote, "We've got a decent car to go racing with," and it's a simple sentence, but I think it speaks volumes. I think that's another sort of one of these quietly confident quotes. I'm not saying that Williams is going to raise up the charts, but I think even just, again, having a platform to develop on that is consistent and the drivers like, and that you can actually notice what changes you've made and how they impact your car. I think that is a lot for a team like Williams. So I am going to continue watching that team closely.
Yeah, it's you get the feeling with James Vowes that there needs to be that, like, he's setting it up that week on week, month on month, year on year, they're going to improve. They're going to improve. Testing is always funny because that's when everyone is also improving the most. It feels like the biggest delta, perhaps, or like the teams that they're fighting with, which are the teams that have the most to gain and least to lose from shaking it up, tend to do it. Obviously, we'll talk about Haas in a second. I do, yeah. I worry about them a bit. I also worry for Logan Sargent as well this year. I feel like last year there was a real gulf between the teammates there, and regardless of Albon's sort of pedigree and his experience at this stage, Sargent felt a little bit lost at sea. So, yeah, I don't know.
He has put on like 10 pounds of muscle.
Has he?
Yeah.
On his neck, or
up.
did he?
Yeah, all neck.
Did he need to put it on? Was that a?
Yeah.
Apparently everyone basically agreed that he needed to get shredded to bring those lap times down. Mission accomplished.
I can't tell if Rob's being facetious.
In the WhatsApp group, yeah.
Okay, good.
Team RB.
Oh God.
This quote here from Racer. That's the establishment. The racer himself is Daniel Ricciardo. Quote, I think in terms of performance, we're as expected. We're trying to fight in that midfield group. I think there's definitely work to do to catch the front guys, but that's no surprise. But I think it was a pretty smooth test. I don't think we leave here with any concerns or scratching our heads. I think we know where we are, and we've got to keep working. So
there you go.
Kind of your standard shot there. I guess same with Sauber here. This is Botas from Autosport. I feel we've made good steps in many different areas, so there's nothing that is worse than last year. That's good. Aero-wise, mechanically, steps forward.
He's like, I gotta go and go fishing. It's like, yeah. I know we're talking mostly about the cars, but this is another duo that I feel like, Bottas, I don't know if he's just more chill now, or he does feel like he's in fourth gear a bit in his career. He's just enjoying the races and not taking it too seriously. You think that Zhou would be doing a little bit better as a result of that? I mean, I don't think this team has got much else to be fighting for anywhere.
It's so tough with these cars that are bad.
Yeah, it's true. It's hard to judge anything. Yeah.
Which I was thinking about this a little bit, where it's like, especially teams that are kind of struggling year on year. It actually makes me more impressed. Like Magnussen and Hulkenberg are as sharp as they clearly are in these cars. I think, it is. I think one of the things about a bad car is like it's really tough to maintain your edge, because like humans, we look for patterns. If we do things and they don't produce results, we start doing different things. But if the car's just bad, then you just need to do what you're doing. The car's crap, but like you're a good driver, you got to stick to it. And I think about like what Horner was talking about when Ricciardo came back to Red Bull, and there's a little bit of Red Bull chest thumping to those comments, but talking about how his form as a driver had really declined across stints, driving kind of shitty Renault and then really, really bad McLaren cars. And I think a struggle, when you talk about like Valtteri feeling like he's kind of just, short shifting into fourth and fifth and just kind of cruising at this stage in his career. I almost feel like to maintain your equilibrium in a team with a bad car, you almost have to do that, because otherwise, if you're really like in there with the bit between your teeth,
just go mad.
Yeah, and I think there's a real risk to your form as a driver, trying to like drive beyond the limits of a car that's kind of crap. It's weird. I feel like I genuinely have no idea how well Zhou or Valtteri stack up to the rest of the field at this point, because we talk about Alpine being kind of anonymous. Like the former Alpha, it feels like it's in witness protection during the race.
Finally, Haas here, and they're an interesting one, to me at least. The huge problem with their car last year was tire wear. They would, qualify well, even getting into Q3 on a handful of occasions. But when the race started, they'd just plummet through the field. So evidently, to get a handle on this, they stuck to long runs in testing and ended up doing more laps than anyone. So if you look at the timesheets, they're slowest. but that maybe because, or due in large part to the fact that they were doing these race simulation runs instead of just trying to go out and do a qualifying lap or something. And it seems like the results were positive. The team saying that they understand the problem and that the car will be a good platform for development. So here's Magnussen from Sports Illustrated. Quote, there is clearly a lot of work to do, but everyone's fired up to investigate and learn about this new car. It was all good and positive. There were no issues on the technical side, and with 82 laps on the board, everything was achieved.
So, fired up to investigate. That's me. Can't wait. Fired up to investigate.
Intrepid reporter.
Exactly.
Well, it is improvement from last year's I am sick of this bullshit response to that year's car, which increasingly did not sound like anyone was fired up to investigate the quirks and features of the 2023 Haas car. But yeah, like, y'all, have we prepared ourselves? What if, just emotionally, what if they fired Gunther and that team gets good?
Oh no.
Are we prepared to live in a world
where Haas is good?
Where our sweet weird boy, they fire him, and it's just like boop, and that team just points upward, and like Ayao and the drivers, like everyone's just pulling in the same direction. They're like, we're nailing it. We're 3D printing parts in the office next to the coffee machine. It's great. Gene hasn't put a penny in this team. We are squarely fifth in the championship. If that happens, like, we all fell in love with the Music Man.
I hope that happens for Magnussen and for Hülkenberg, because they've done, no one was happy. Everyone was delighted when both those guys got their go back, especially when Hülkenberg came back, I think, who ended his F1 career upside down in Bahrain. I think he was happy to see him back. But yeah, I don't know. I feel like they are going to be swimming at the back of the field again this year. We'll have to see, but it wasn't a particularly positive test for them.
All right, well, that is testing. We're going to take a break here, and then we will be back with the nears. All right, we're back with a couple Rob news stories. Rob, can you take us through?
These aren't about me.
Rob, what's going on in your
you're
life?
Under investigation. What is up with that?
Ford are not happy, Rob. Answer to your crimes.
Yeah, so as we discussed previously, Christian Horner is under investigation for like abusive behavior toward a colleague. Beyond that, we don't know a ton of details. And so like it's an internal investigation being run by Red Bull, headed up by like some an attorney they hire, like external counsel to lead the investigation. But we know nothing about it. We know that he was like, I think, interviewed a couple weeks ago as part of this probe, and everyone was like, well, we're going to learn some news. And nothing came of it, but also it didn't get dismissed. Like, this thing has not wrapped up. And so we're kind of out of the window where it feels like if this was going to be a corporate brush-off thing, that would have happened by now.
Surely. Yeah, exactly.
And so it hasn't. And I don't want to, like, again, we don't know what that means. It could imply that, like, the knives are out for him at Red Bull and, they really want to get him out of there. Or it could be there's some real smoke, there's some real fire behind some smoke here, and they're just taking time. We have no idea. And that leaves the whole team in a weird position because he is still, like, leading the team. But crucially, it's also starting to get to some of Red Bull's corporate partners. This week, Ford CEO Jim Farley apparently wrote a letter to Red Bull basically demanding some kind of clarity about what is going on with this investigation. This from Autosport. Farley writes that Ford is increasingly frustrated by the lack of resolution or clear indication from you about when you anticipate a fair and just resolution of this matter. We are likewise frustrated by the lack of full transparency surrounding this matter with us, your corporate partners, and look forward to receiving a complete accountable findings. Quick backstory on this. Ford is now Red Bull's corporate partner, future partner of Red Bull powertrains. Like, Ford is going to be getting into F1 via the Red Bull F1 team. That's what's going on here. If you are, the way these things work, and I think we've all we've all worked in worlds where like marketing budgets and like corporate sign off is all like part of how these things go. There are, I am certain, tons of promotional events, marketing spend, a lot of things that were queued up and authorized and ready to go for this year to celebrate Ford and Red Bull being partners, and Red Bull being excited to team up with Ford being excited to team up with Red Bull. And now you got this big black box sitting in the middle of that. And inside of it is, what has Christian Horner been accused of? And what has he actually done? And there are potentially some very scary answers to that question if you're someone who's about to like get into a close, like we're best corporate friends, like this is our cool partnership, and there's a possibility that you are about to become enmeshed in what would be one of the biggest scandals in F1 man. Like if something has happened here that would cause Horner to be dismissed and like sort of resign in disgrace, it would be the biggest, the most scandalous exit of an F1 team principal since Flavio Briatore,
right?
Who fixed a race and caused a kid to crash,
right? But equally, it could be nothing and bureaucracy that's making this thing drag on. But to Ford's mind, like their exposure is the same because they don't know.
That is a good point too. Again, I worked at Red Bull.
Right. Yes. When you were investigated, it took like at least 2 months for those charges to clear. The money was just resting in your account.
Oh man, there's stories I tell you about Red Bull, because it was like sometimes you just got to clean house and you got to do it in a way that doesn't leave fingerprints, and you can make that bureaucracy work for you. But the thing I discovered in that process is that the bureaucracy is also very slow. That is a company that does not move fast over anything. So I can imagine, like, if you're Ford, you're like, let's get this investigation going, and then let's get some resolution, figure out what's going on. Red Bull is a very slow, deliberative company. There's always a lot of stakeholders to any decision. It is maddening. But you're right. We don't know what's going on with this investigation, but from the standpoint of Red Bull, and I assume there's other partners that for the standpoint of Ford, and I assume there are other partners that are in a similar boat.
Sponsors.
Yeah. You really want to know exactly what is the story about to be about Red Bull. And we just have no insight on that. But I saw some discussion that, like, with Ford pressing to get this moving, there's going to be some pressure that Red Bull feels to release some kind of finding in the coming days, even if it's not definitive. So hopefully we get some sense of what is going on soon. But in the meantime, it is crossed a threshold where everyone is starting to feel weird about it. It
could be breaking as soon as the day this podcast goes live. I just did a more recent search for it. The Guardian are reporting that Red Bull are getting ready to announce verdict on Christian Horner this week, and the decision could come on Wednesday.
Well, if you're a longtime listener, you know that we make the news happen by posting our podcast.
By missing it. By missing that boat entirely.
Yeah.
But I'll be around. Look, I'll be around if we need to do an emergency pod. It can happen. We're meeting tomorrow for a Patreon show anyway.
Exactly. We'll just spit one out. Easy peasy.
Well, Ford's not the only ones upset with Horner, Rob.
This one is broader, just irritation with Red Bull and RB, I guess we'll call them the Faenza team.
Yeah.
Which
let's just call them Toro Rosso. Can we just agree to call them Toro Rosso for God's sake?
Just bring it back, man. This sucks.
Such a good name.
This is in my notes. RB is Red Bull. The notion that we have a team called RB is just absurd.
It's absolutely ridiculous.
There's always V-carb.
Oh, Jesus. I'm still annoyed about Alpine, to be honest.
Yeah, so am I. If being entirely like either bring the Alpine brand back fully or don't. But like this is ridiculous. This is like stand up a real manufacturer for Christ's sake. Anyway, so we alluded to this a bit in the preseason primer that like there were some indications that Red Bull is moving the Faenza, former AlphaTauri, former Toro Rosso team more closer to their Milton Keynes headquarters in the UK and shifting the center of gravity away from its Faenza headquarters, where they're based. And that raised some hackles because there's always been kind of weirdness of like, they're a clear B team, right? Like Red Bull has a team that they are running to win the championship, and then they have a second team that they are not running to win a championship and is not really competing for race wins. And that has always rubbed people a little bit the wrong way. But with its moves to sort of rationalize operations and bring Faenza maybe a little bit closer to the Milton Keynes operation, there's been some pushback from other parties in F1 that like this relationship and how it is managed really needs to be revisited as far as like rules enforcement and regulations go. Zach Brown, an interview I think in the past week or so mentioned, he said there's not another major sport that I know of where you can own two teams that compete. It's not allowed in any other sport because of political influence and player trading. It's for all the reasons you can think of. And he pointed out one thing, like for instance, you're thinking about like how can this advantage one team? Anytime we talk about this all the time, every time you hire senior technical staff from another company in F1, you don't get them. Sometimes for 6 months, sometimes a year. They just go and they go on gardening leave, right? The whole like, well, we want this person to join our technical staff, but there is a non-compete clause. In fact, it needs to run out before we can start like bringing them in-house. And so for everyone else, if you want to hire someone else's technical staff, there's a long delay before you can do that. Red Bull and the Faenza team waive that all the time. They can just sort of transfer personnel freely between them. And you think about that's a real efficiency advantage you can get if it works that way. Now, people, as part of Red Bull and Faenza, they've downplayed this quite a bit. Horner's response to this was, the commitment that Red Bull has made to F1, the commitment that Red Bull has made to these two teams is outstanding and should be applauded. You should be grateful for it rather than deride and try to compromise it, which is beautiful. But Laura Mekis and Peter Baer, who the CEO and team principal of RB, have said that basically this is just how it has to work for smaller teams to be viable at all in the sport. Like they need to have these like close collaborative relationships with senior teams because otherwise they would not be anywhere near being competitive. And they're already struggling to stay competitive.
And other teams do. Sorry, go ahead, Danny.
Yeah, I was going to bring it up actually, because I wanted to bring up two first episodes of recent Netflix documentaries about race cars. One of them being actually it might be the first episode, but there was a moment in Drive to Survive when Gunther Steiner goes into his office, and it's basically in Maranello. It's in the Ferrari building. So like you're like, okay, I guess Haas is like basically based out of the back of Ferrari. That's interesting. And then the other one is the have either of you watched the NASCAR Netflix series?
Not yet.
I've been enjoying it so far. It's a little bit long in the tooth, but it's only 5 episodes long. But the first episode is basically all about Denny Hamlin and the fact that he drives for one team and owns a competing team. And the NASCAR documentary basically starts at the last day of playoffs. So the last window to get into playoffs. And he is basically saying, this is back in the 2023 season, that if it's up for him and Bubba Wallace, who drives for his, was it 2311 or whatever is the name of the team, his team that he owns, that he'll let Bubba win, get in before him, which is like completely insane. And he's saying that, and like the team owner's like, ooh, I don't know. So although that put this into context. You could be a worse situation if both of them were fighting. At least the fact that it is a B team makes it so that there's a lot of situations and scenarios that we do not have to deal with.
Yeah, just to kind of contextualize this in the larger grid, there are partnerships, right? You alluded to Ferrari and Haas. Haas gets a lot of their parts from Ferrari as per the regulations. Mercedes gives parts to Aston Martin and Williams. There are rules disallowing certain data sharing. So there's a lot that Red Bull can't give RB and vice versa. So there are precedents and there are rules against this stuff, but you're right, Rob. There are some kind of like things that aren't necessarily addressed.
Well, and I think what Brown has said he kind of is driving towards and what he wants to see from F1 is basically more regulatory oversight to ensure that however close these companies get physically to one another in their operations, that the metaphorical wall between their operations retains its integrity. They want something a bit more like a bit the way Brembo was supervised, where teams design their own brakes. This was the whole scandal with the Racing Point thing. Had they gotten access to Mercedes data that they shouldn't have had access to? And I think it was sort of traced back to did it happen basically via Brembo? Because even though the companies, because brakes and tires and all this is a hugely significant aerodynamic component, teams design their own brakes. And then the same company, Brembo, fabricates them. You want racing brakes, you go to Brembo. That's basically the world we live in. And the way Brembo can service all these people is that you're buying their fabrication capacity, but they build to your spec and your design. And so at Brembo, everyone's brake data is there. Everyone's designs are there. And the only reason that works, and everyone can benefit from the efficiency of just sort of outsourcing brake manufacture to this one company, is because everyone has pretty absolute confidence that design knowledge is not leaking from one side of Brembo's operation to competitors. What they kind of want is Red Bull and RB to be subjected to a similar sort of scrutiny to make sure that they are not getting undue synergistic advantages via proximity or knowledge share that other teams can enjoy. And Red Bull doesn't want this. And that could be because, what are they hiding? It could also be regulatory compliance is a pain in the ass. Every single time you're talking about this should be overseen and scrutinized. It's a lot more stuff you have to check. And there's non-sinister reasons why you don't want to be observed that closely. And that's part of it.
Well, let's observe the Bahrain Grand Prix closely. To do that, we'll need to know about the track, Danny.
Yes, Bahrain, we're back. 2024. This will be the 20th race on this track.
Oh my
it'll
God.
also, I know it's crazy. It'll also mean, if I'm doing my math right, and I could be wrong. No, I think I'm right. This would also mean that we have now finally had as many night races as day races, because it was 2014 when they swapped this from a day race to a night race. So does that make sense?
Yeah.
Or is this 20? Does this make this 11 and the other one was 9? I don't know. It's hard.
Danny, this will also mean that we have covered half of the Bahrain races.
Oh my lord. Oh my lord. This feels like a new track to me still, and it's obviously not. It's a track that's changed a little bit over the years. Nips and tucks. There was one time where they took out a big chunk right after turn 1 that doesn't, turn 4, the sector 1 that doesn't exist anymore. But it's a track that, for the most part, has provided some pretty decent racing. There are overtake spots here. There's a couple of unique corners that exist. It's a 57 lap race. It's 5.4 kilometers. It's about 3.4 miles. One of the aspects of this track which has gone under some scrutiny has been the large runoff areas that exist here. there's not much in the way of gravel or anything when you've got one of these sandy, windy tracks. So they tended to have, it's probably also a track, I assume, that gets a decent amount of sort of weekend drivers, that type of thing. With its location, I'm sure there's plenty of rich people who are happy to bring their sports cars here. You tend to get more runoff on those tracks as a result. But so I wonder if that'll factor in at all. If these cars are happier going over the curbs, maybe they're happier, throwing it over the edge a little bit. We'll have to see. They obviously policed runoff stuff a lot more seriously second half of last season. But as a track, it's got 3 DRS zones. It's got one on the main straight. It has one on the front straight, which is almost immediately after that main straight, a couple of turns later. And then there is a mini straight kind of in the middle of the track down once it comes down off the hill, where there's another one. The 2 areas I think that are the most interesting, or let's say the 3, we'll get 2 where we'll get overtakes, and then one that's just cool to look at. Turn 4, which is the end of that second straight, unless it's the first lap and then it's the first straight. That one is a great overtaking spot for folks as they sort of close the distance. It's a hard braking zone there. Not much in the way of high speed corners, as we were saying. But one of the more interesting places to look at is turn 12 and 13 as they go back up the hill. Sector 2 is kind of like you go downhill back towards where the start finish straight is, and then you go back uphill again.
It's got that really great hairpin too, the one that's got sort of like the knife shaped profile, 9 and 10, where it's like you start turning in and then it gets real tight real suddenly. 10
is one of the most interesting corners in the season for sure. It's because it's off camber, it's downhill, and it also has this sort of like, as you said, like the turn sort of undulates 2 or 3 times. There was some great, actually in Drive to Survive, there's some great overtakes from Alonso last year, just throwing it down in there and sort of getting that little bit of camber and the downhill to stop you a little bit closer there. Great turn. So and on the inverse of that, going down is interesting there, and then going up, you mentioned earlier that whole section from that end of the third DRS zone all the way to turn 11, 12, 13. It's just uphill, pedal to the metal.
Well, I think that speaks to like one of the things I really like about this track is that the passes have a lot of like building action to them, where it is like, Dan, your point about turn 4, that is where the overtake happens. But it is set up starting at turn 1 through that chicane and all the way up at 4. And so you have like the entire chase down the main straight, and then it culminates at turn 4. And there's lots of like tactical games people can play, because that DRS zone that starts after the chicane, if you just like let someone pass you at turn 1, you can steal the march on them basically and get that DRS hit right away. And similarly, I think, with the corner at 9 and 10, if you can team like cars that handle that really, really well, can set you up for an attack heading down that sort of short straight up to 11, and then you start the rising action of the hill. This has become one of my favorite tracks. Like if we're saying that like F1 tracks are either like kind of bad, fine, or great, this would be in my great category.
Yeah, I agree. If you're to split it in 3s, this would be in the green section for sure. There's just loads of spots where as well they drive close, even if it's not necessarily somewhere you think they're going to overtake. Like that back straight, there's another straight that doesn't have a DRS on it, that leads back into the start finish, and that's always interesting to see how close they get, because then they never overtake at the end of that thing, because you're going into the start finish straight and there's all these DRS zones, but that's where they set it up, and then maybe they'll do it on turn 1. Also after turn 4, as you mentioned, that's a great place to do overtakes. That's where we saw a lot of they overtook me, but then they went over into the runoff. Was that a fair overtake? And then you have the battle down into turn 6 is kind of where it's a little bit like Cops and Maggots and Beckett's at Silverstone, where like you get the overtake done, but then they're still fighting to you until they have to get out because of one of those medium speed corners, right? So yeah, it's pretty cool. It's a good one, and it's also one people might remember. This is where Grosjean also had his crash as well.
The alternate layout, right? That's when they're running as the
Sakir Grand Prix. Yeah, where they basically just got rid of that whole middle section. fun track. And also, what's going on this weekend? It's Saturday, the race time, because of Ramadan, I believe.
Yes, and I've got the weather right here.
It's raining.
It is not raining, although apparently the Formula 2 test there was rain.
Oh, really?
Yeah.
Wow.
Temperatures look to be fairly low, I would expect, although maybe not for this early in the year. 63 degrees on qualifying and race day. No precipitation. Wind, however, may be a factor. At qualifying time, we've got 14 miles an hour or 23 kilometers an hour out of the north. And then at race time, it's much lower. We got 6 miles an hour or 10 kilometers an hour out of the northeast. So I guess we'll see come qualifying whether that Ferrari car is indeed fixed in terms of wind sensitivity.
Yeah, come qualifying on Friday. And in fact, we're going to have,
That's
if
right.
you're listening to this the day it gets published, practice starts tomorrow at like lunchtime on Thursday. It's crazy.
Yeah, so get your fantasy teams in. We now have activated a fantasy league. The link is in the show notes for you to join. You can also hit us up on the emails, shiftf1podcast@gmail.com or f1.cool/emails. We usually do emails on the pre-race shows, but this one is so stacked. We're punting.
You want me to have one? I got one fun one.
You got fun one?
All right, let's do it.
This is in relation to something we talked about, I think, toward the end of last year.
Okay.
JP from Maryland writes, I couldn't resist writing in after hearing Danny's excited talk about Point Nemo. I work at the Goddard Space Flight Center on the OSAM-1 mission as the lead for the Flight Dynamics ground system team. Basically, that means I work with analysts and write computer programs we use on the ground to calculate when and how long to burn OSAM-1's engines in order to do what we want to do, which is capturing fuel Landsat 7, as well as demonstrating an on-orbit assembly technique. The fun, cool version of this is saying, I'm a spaceship pilot. When OSAM-1's mission is complete, we'll be dropping it into the ocean in a mission phase called decommissioning. Sure enough, our target splashdown zone is a big, giant circle around Point Nemo, which, as we learned, a couple months ago, is the point furthest from land on the globe.
Anywhere on the globe, and it's down where it's like south. It's been in the Pacific Ocean, south Pacific Ocean.
Yeah, it's like between South America and Australia.
Right. Yeah.
Satellites move super crazy fast, so being off by even a few seconds means you go really far. So you want as much wiggle room as you can get, hence aiming for the middle of the ocean. Crashing a spacecraft into a specific place is surprisingly difficult. If anyone has any questions about OSAM-1 or spaceflight in general, feel free to hit me up at any time. Love the podcast. I've been listening since day one. Thanks for kindling my love of F1. P.S. I'm the creator of The Space Above Us. Give it a listen sometime and learn about human spaceflight history.
The
Lots
Space
of fun
Above Us
stories
podcast.
I promise you've never heard, as well as the real versions of stories you have.
There you go.
I have heard people not with any interest in like promoting that podcast. People have mentioned like, it's a really good podcast.
All right.
Drew, you give it a listen because it does. I always get the sense it's a Drew Scanlon-ass podcast.
I should really listen to that podcast.
This became this is not an ad buy. I just want to let everyone know this season is not going to get an email from every sponsor. But I am excited to hear that. That is cool.
Wow. The OSAM-1 on-orbit servicing, assembly, and manufacturing. That's what that stands for, is a NASA spacecraft designed to test on-orbit refilling of satellites. So this is, when the
space truckers,
when the fighter jets crawl up behind the refueling tanker, they're doing that in space.
Can you imagine?
Right, that's cool.
That's the thing. People are always like, "Oh, it must be cool to have like this Formula One podcast," and it absolutely is. But the thing that I always find the most cool is when you hear about when people listen to it, what their jobs are and what they do. And that can be like, oh, I'm like a primary school teacher and I listen on the way to work. Or it can be, I help restock space shuttles or whatever. That's
Yeah.
it's
I mean,
pretty cool.
If you've never been on the internet making content before, it can be like you're just casting yourself into the void.
Oh,
So
totally. Yeah.
getting those kinds of emails are really, really cool.
It's very, very cool. Yeah.
We also just got one because this is an email that I suddenly have a lot more sympathy for Ted Kravitz on.
Okay.
So my feelings about this have changed.
Is this
Hey
from
guys,
Ted
your
Kravitz?
discussion on the most recent podcast about the teams being renamed for 2024, AlphaTauri and Alfa Romeo, reminded me of something that stuck out to me while watching the races this year. Have you noticed that Ted Kravitz has a weird obsession with referring to Alfa Romeo as Alfa Romeo Sauber? I know that technically it is the Sauber team and they used to be called that, but since Alfa Romeo sponsorship, they dropped the Sauber part. Everyone else I've ever heard on the commentary, including Crofty, Brundle, Karun, Jensen, etc., simply refer to Alfa Romeo as Alfa Romeo. But every single time Ted Kravitz talks about them, he insists on calling them Alfa Romeo Sauber. It really stood out to me as weird and pretentious that he insists on doing this when no one else seems to care. I started eye-rolling so hard every time he said it this way, which turns out is a lot. Just curious if any of you had noticed this or had any insight into why he might do it. Am I the only one who was annoyed by it? Okay, I would have said I was annoyed by it. And then they named the team RB. And then they named the team Kick Sauber. And suddenly, like, this is why I'm like, fuck it. The Faenza team, I don't know what to call them. RB is that is way too confusing. Like, my notes say RB for years, going back years. RB is Red Bull.
Red Bull.
So I can understand how, like, you at a certain point, you can just be like, you can name that team whatever you want. Here's the organization that it is. And we're just going to remember that, like, there is a continuity here that, like, this is the Sauber team. Alfa Romeo is not some new entity. It's the same leadership. It's the same people. It is effectively Sauber. And now I see why there's some utility to that, because I don't know what to do with Cash App, Visa, RB, and I don't know what to do with crypto kickback, Sauber. Like, I just don't know. And so suddenly I'm like, I do the return meme to like Sauber and Minardi.
Yeah, I can't, like, I'm trying to remember, this is new, right? There was never any previous, I'm trying to remember if previous eras of F1 had this much, not just name changing season by season, but also the advertising being in the name. Like, I know teams got bought over and stuff, but like, Jordan, but like never Visa, Cash App or this level.
Right. Title sponsors were always like, there's your real team name, and then in the official listing of what the team is, we'll put a bullshit AMG Petronas F1.
100%.
Great.
Exactly. Yeah.
It's Mercedes F1. We all know what that is. And yeah, this is the first year, it feels like, where the title sponsorship is like, no. If we're going to buy the title sponsorship, you need to sandblast your team's identity. And let us like graffiti our shitty brand on top of it.
Jalopnik does have an article called 15 F1 team names worse than Visa Cash App Racing Bulls.
Oh, please. Give us a few.
King?
Give us a few.
Atlantis King?
Etihad Aldar Spiker F1 team.
Man, was that what Spiker was called?
But see, it was
again,
Spiker.
though,
it was Spiker.
They were just called Spiker, right?
Racing Point Force India Formula One team.
Yeah, that was not great.
Yeah, but their man was on the run from the law.
Aston Martin Aramco Cognizant F1 team.
Again, though, it's that same thing. It's like MoneyGram Haas F1, right?
Yep.
Like, no one called them that. That was just like whenever they had to introduce themselves on Trying to Survive, or it wasn't the same as like.
I guess so. Your main beef is not the sponsors. It's that at the end of the sponsor we have to say RB.
Yeah, or that the sponsor name is now the name of the team, like
because RB is a non-entity.
I guess, but we're not calling it Visa Cash App, are we? But we're calling it Kick Sauber. Kick is a
I am
sponsor.
not calling it that.
See, and this is how we all turn into Ted Kravitz, folks. And like, I understand, like, our question writers sitting there being like, man, just give it up. And it's like, at a certain point, your brain is less neuroplastic, and you don't like having to learn bullshit to stay current on things. And you're just like, you know what? I think I'm going to call you Sauber. You look like a Sauber to me.
You look like a Sauber to me. Yeah, each of us, it turns out, has our own line for bullshit, and we know where Ted Kravitz is, and now some of us are learning where ours are as well.
Well, we all are going to be in Bahrain this weekend, either physically or via television. Formula 2 and Formula 3 will also be there, joining Formula 1. By the way, F1 Academy kicks off, I believe, at the next round. Yes, Saudi Arabia. We've got the Craftsman trucks racing at Las Vegas Motor Speedway in the Victoria's Voice Foundation 200. The FIA World Endurance Championship is at Lusail International Circuit for the Qatar 1,812 kilometers.
Doesn't have a good ring to it.
Nice.
I see what they're going for, a Daytona thing there, but it doesn't really work.
The NASCAR Xfinity Series is also at the Las Vegas Motor Speedway for the Liuna ! It's spelled L lowercase I and then all caps UNA ! I have no idea what's going on there.
Laborers International Union of North America.
Okay.
Is that accurate?
I don't. Well, no, because the I is lowercase.
Northern. It is.
Okay.
That's what it says.
All right.
It's a union gig.
Okay. All right. You can't help the pit crew put the tires down. They have to do it themselves.
Exactly. Yeah, you're not allowed. Yeah.
We also got NASCAR.
Wow.
Also at Las Vegas
Motor Speedway
for the Pennzoil 400 presented by Jiffy Lube.
That's more like it. None of this Liona.
All this
oil and lube. That's what America's built on.
That's right. Petroleum products. And Formula 1 is this weekend. Kind of.
That?
Thursday, things kick off.
Yeah, it's stretching it, yeah.
Yes, Thursday, February 29th. And it's a leap year. It's crazy.
Oh my God, you're right. This is a pub quiz question. That's what
Free Practice 1 is 6:30 a.m. Eastern Time on ESPN2, followed by Free Practice 2 at 10 o'clock a.m., also on ESPN2. Friday, Free Practice 3, this is March 1st, kicks off at 7:30 a.m. on ESPN2, followed by qualifying at 11 a.m., also on ESPN2. But the race, everyone, Saturday, 10 a.m. Eastern Time on ESPN.
Whoa.
And that's your show.
We're back. I'm excited. Look, let's be honest. Max Verstappen has won the 2024 F1 championship. I'm just going to say. Hey, if you're picking a fantasy team, here's a pro tip. Make sure you pick the right RB team. That's going to be the hardest thing you have to do, is making sure you don't accidentally pick the other crowd.
Or you pick both.
Like
I did.
Yeah, just
for my
cover
team,
yourself and
welcome to Arby's.
Oh, is it really? That's really good. That's really good.
I'm going to sit here and I'm going to live in hope that Carlos Sainz's best time from testing, it's going to hold up. It wasn't that the track was gripping up and it was just getting faster and everyone is going to be like a second or two faster on that lap. No. It's because Ferrari came to play this year. And we're in for another memorable one.
Well, I guess we'll see.
Hey, I'm just happy we're back. I'm just happy it's back. Yeah. It's going to be a lot of races. There's going to be plenty of them. I think do what we did for a lot of last year and just forget about first place if it ends up being that way.
Drive to Survive did.
Yeah. Oh my God. Oh my God. Max Verstappen.
And you know what? It's the better for it.
It is. In previous years, you could notice that Max Verstappen wasn't talking to them. Didn't even fucking cross my mind.
Well, and now he does talk to them. There's nothing to cover.
We just didn't ask. You're like, oh, whatever. Screw it. Yeah, no, I'm looking forward to the weekend, but we'll know a lot more. Yeah. There'll be no sandbagging in Bahrain, which is ironic.
The most exciting qualifying is always the first one.
Yeah.
But yes, patrons can stay tuned for the Drive to Survive episode coming soon. But if you'd like to support the show and get access to all that, the ad-free version of the podcast, and the official Shift+F1 Discord, you can do so over at patreon.com/ShiftF1. Have a good race weekend, everyone. We will see you all next week.
Meow.